Hey again guys, back here with part 2. So, while in part 1 I predominantly focused on the events before a Game of Thrones, during a Game of Thrones, as well as a Clash of Kings, this part I'm going to focus more on where Theon's at the moment, where he is at the end of A Dance with Dragons, and what I think is going on in A Dance with Dragons. As the title suggests, I'm going to talk about Theon and his possible redemption, and anyone who has already made up their mind on whether he is redeemable or not already, potentially even after reading Book 2 you might have made up your mind on this. I will just say, hear me out and hear some of the points I have to make. Now, first, before I delve properly into what's going on in Dance with the Dragons, I'm going to make a couple of points that I neglected to make and should have made in the first video. Now, firstly, Theon has a history of being seen more as a tool than as a person, a means to an end by people. Eddard Stark in the first book at one point says to Catelyn, I'll show the quote up here, he says to Catelyn, Theon is important because we need his father. So, in a sense, Eddard, as honourable as he is, just sees Theon as a way of keeping Balon in his back pocket, nothing more. Fast forward to when Theon goes to Pike, he's manipulated by Asher and Theon, essentially, and again used as a tool to assault the North from where he came. And now, the cycle is repeating itself in A Dance with Dragons. So in the first chapter, Theon is Reek, he has been in the dungeons for 6 months, he's been flayed, he's insane, he's a lot of things that he wasn't before. But the whole arc of A Dance with Dragons starts when the Boltons need him to go and negotiate with some Iron Men, and then they need him to oversee the wedding between Jane Poole, or Arya Stark, and Ramsay Bolton. So again, he's just being used for his position, and I think this again says a little bit about Theon's lack of his sort of self-identity of what he is or who he is. He is simply Theon Greyjoy, or Prince of Winterfell, or, a hostage of Eddard Stark's to be used to keep Balon on his guard. He is never really seen as the person he is, and therefore he never had a strong identity of the person who he was either. He came to see himself the same way as others saw him, merely a tool to be used to their own means. Also, and I intend to make this point quickly, because it's not overly relevant to what's going on in this video, I think an interesting parallel with the Reek thing is that Ramsay disguised himself as someone named Reek in A Clash of Kings, and he was essentially this really sadistic little shit, obviously, whispering in Theon's ear during that siege of Winterfell, and it's essentially, I see Ramsay in that sense as being a sort of part of Theon that was in there already, that Reek thing attempting to take over and attempting to influence him. And sadly in the end it does, so just some food for thought there. So I guess without any further ado, I'll get to the main point of part 2 of this analysis, and that's that Theon in A Dance with Dragons is actually a much more triumphant story than it might seem like to some people reading it, because his chapters obviously were quite difficult to read. He doesn't know who he is, he's been flayed, he's been tortured, all these things. It's really quite heinous, but at the same time, I see Theon in A Dance with Dragons as a redemptive story, and I'll tell you why. It's because he's lost everything. He is completely at his captor's mercy, and throughout the course of the book, and towards the end of the book, while being pressured from Mance Rayner and his wildling girls, Theon goes against his captor. Theon goes against every urge to do what he believes is right, to save Jane Poole and to go against Ramsay Bolton. And that final chapter where arrows are flying everywhere, people are dying, the whole plan's gone wrong, and he grabs Jane by the waist and jumps the 80 feet, successfully saving her. I see that as Theon's return to self-identity. And a little interesting thing I noticed is I think the chapter titles of Theon's pages actually back me up a little bit on this. So before I go into that though, George R.R. Martin in his series, he has this tendency after A Feast for Crows of giving strange chapter names to some of the characters. I mean, I don't think Victarion or Ariane, I think that's how you say her name, got a single chapter with their actual name on it. Instead, we get the Iron Suitor, the Iron Captain, the Princess in a Tower. I don't know what was going on with those at the moment, that's not what this video is about. But with Theon in A Dance with Dragons, At first, the chapter name is just Reek, okay? And that's how he sees himself, as Reek, not as Theon. He's not that anymore, he's forgotten who he is, he's Reek. After that, I believe a chapter was called The Prince of Winterfell, and that's because that's what he was being used at the time. He was overseeing the wedding and saying, yes, this is Arya Stark, when obviously it's not, it's Jane Poole, it's all a murmur's farce. And that's who he was in that chapter, a tool being used by the Boltons. And then after that, discarded, the ghost of Winterfell, walking around Winterfell, haunted by memories of his past. Again, still not Theon. But the last chapter, when he's met up with Mance Rayner, and I really liked Mance Rayner's little plot in A Dance with Dragons, but again, going on, after he's met up with Mance Rayner, after he's decided to go through with the plan to save Jane Poole, even though there's still resistance on his part, his chapter is now called for the first time, Theon. He even, when talking to Jane, says, I am Theon Greyjoy, you know me. He has remembered his name, and he is effectively reconstructing his own identity. Now, make no mistake here while listening to this, I don't think it's going to be a happy ending for Theon. I don't think it can possibly be a happy ending for Theon. In fact, it'll be a relief to me if he gets executed. But I still think, in a sense, this makes his arc in A Dance with Dragons much more triumphant than you would otherwise think. It's sort of like triumphant in a sick way, you know, as befitting the author. It's like this bittersweet victory of Theon over his captors, and I quite liked thinking about it in retrospect. I didn't enjoy reading it, but I liked thinking about it afterwards, and I'm quite enjoying recapping it right now. So on to the overall point, and I want to know what you guys think of this, and I want to know if anyone disagrees with me. But that is Theon in A Dance with Dragons being redeemed from his past indiscretions, being redeemed from his heinous acts in A Clash of Kings. As I stated in the Jaime Lannister video some 5 months back, and as you might see with Sansa as well, redemption in Westeros is possible, but it does not come easy. I mean, Jaime had to lose his right hand before he could become a better person, before he could be redeemed in our eyes. And Sansa, from being a spoiled little girl, who essentially, unbeknownst to herself, sold her father out, has to go through everything. In fact, she's worth another video on her own, so I won't say too much on her. But basically she is tortured by her captors, and every little fantasy she's ever had is shattered before her eyes before she can achieve redemption too. I think what's happening with Theon being tortured by Ramsay is the exact same thing. I think it's an attempt for George R.R. Martin to give a character who at one point, I'm willing to bet a lot of you after reading A Clash of Kings or watching Season 2 of A Game of Thrones saw the character as irredeemable. I think this is George trying to give him a bit of a sickening redemption, and for my money, I think he's succeeding. I've made the points I wanted to make in the second part of the video. It's actually kind of funny. I'd written down notes for both parts of the video, and the first part I had them in front of me, the second part I had to rewrite them just now, so this one might not be as coherent as the one before, or I'm not feeling like it was as good, but I do feel like I've said everything I wanted to say, and that I've justified why I think Theon in A Dance with Dragons is a bit of a redemptive story. But, as ever, I'm curious to know what anyone who is listening to this thinks. Do you think Theon is redeemed by the end of A Dance with Dragons? Do you think that's what's going on, or am I way off the money? Or did you think from A Clash of Kings that he was irredeemable, and do you stick by that? I mean, whatever the case, I'd like to know. And also, he has a chapter in The Winds of Winter where things are still looking bleak for him. He's in Stannis's, prison, being interrogated for information. He's still terrified of Ramsay Bolton. Where do you guys think Theon's story is going to go in the next book? I mean, I can't say for sure what's going to happen to the guy. I'll be honest, I don't see him returning to Pike and overthrowing Euron and sitting on the Seastone chair. I think Theon as a Greyjoy has probably run its course, but I may be wrong. The books are perpetually surprising like that. I mean, if Victarion can get a hand grafted back, if Beric Dondarrion can be brought back to life, then maybe some fire priestess will come and grow Theon's cock back, and, he'll be some super alpha stud again, though I doubt it. Just, let me know what you guys think, and Any and all feedback would be appreciated. So, for those of you who have made it this far, thank you for listening, and if possible, here's a little hint as to what I'll cover next week.